here once more by Magic Fireplace to indulge in another bout of criticism for myself, the OmnusCritic. Today we have a rather interesting piece for your consideration, of course. It's one that I've been struggling to wrap my brain around, but now that I have, I think that I can offer a fair and just criticism to the piece. Tonight we are enjoying a tasty Riesling of the brand Barefoot. It's not expensive, but it is rather tasty, light and fruity. I do recommend it for people who don't like dry wines. Now, the work that we are going to consider today is available digitally. It was crafted primarily by a man named J.V. West, and it is billed as a continuing web magazine. I speak, of course, of Black Pudding. This being the primary and initial installment of Black Pudding, we will discuss, using competent criticism, exactly what this thing is and if it is worthy of your consideration. So, that being said, what is Black Pudding? Well, as I said, Black Pudding is a web magazine for people who use old school rules. That is, games that are based primarily, or at least in part, on the earliest versions of Dungeons & Dragons. Therefore, that would include games as diverse as Labyrinth Lords, Swords and Wizardry, The Black Hack, among a multitude of others. You could also try squeezing these rules into Advanced Dungeons & Dragons if you care to. It would certainly liven up the game. So, let's delve into this piece, shall we? Now, the contents of this work are illustrated much in a manner as you might imagine a talented young man in high school filling notebooks full of his favorite fantasy themes. The warriors are all half-dressed, rugged, masculine warriors. The females are buxom and barely clad, and some of the humor in that is actually taken into account in the content. Now, and what content there is. The game itself features 7 new classes to adapt into your games. It has 2 separate dungeons, all with a map of sorts and outlining where all the encounters would be. There are several NPCs in a sort of a henchman's guild that use the classes that are portrayed in this selection. There are 8 magical blades that can be inserted into your game. Fair warning, you should pay attention to exactly what they can do. Some of them are very powerful. There are 11 custom spells, all themed around silver and mirrors. Quite imaginative. I was rather impressed with them. There are 2 custom character sheets, hand-drawn, seemingly by the creator, Mr. West. And there are also alternate campaign rules that one might use. I suspect that these are ones taken directly from the author's home campaign. The Doomslaker's campaign notes and rules alterations make for a brilliantly deadly game, featuring things like exploding dice and strict adherence to more basic Dungeons & Dragons rules, where one race fits a class. A dwarf is a dwarf, not a dwarven warrior, or so on. As far as other suggestions for alternate rules, They have a suggestion for magical fumble rules and other magical abilities that can spice up a wizard and give them a little bit more punch. And there are also a quite clever, fast and off-the-cuff redoing of the rules for initiative, which I thought were fairly clever. And now comes the part in the criticism where we judge the work based on my 4 criteria, as far as aesthetics, writing, mechanics, and value. So, let's have at it, shall we? As far as the aesthetics, these are not what you might consider professional grade artworks. It appears that Mr. West does most of the art himself. As far as fitting a particular theme, well, he's no Elmore. However, his works are in black and white, and they harken back to the older days of the black and white pencilings that were in early game manuals. When artists like, say, Errol Otis illustrated and gave life to the bare bones imaginings of the creators of some of the most famous role-playing games in their antiquity. As far as capturing a certain feel and a style, Mr. West's style is more than sufficient to bring back memories of that style of gameplay and that style of art that was found in those manuals. His works range from quick sketches that obviously he did relatively swiftly to works that are actually quite, well, dare I say it, they're edging on certainly what I've seen others take as professional work. I think with a little bit of development and perhaps some time for layout and design, these works will be more than just charming. They actually might start approaching some of the finer works that you can see on web magazines, without going into the extravagance of full-color, realistic prints. I don't think that's the focus of Black Pudding, and I don't think that's something that it should be judged to. As far as the layout and design, the dungeons are a bit rough. The print is small. Some of the print doesn't all run commonly. Some of it is at angles and sometimes runs down the page. But that's a matter of formatting. A lot of information going onto the page at one time. And again, it has kind of its own charm. Much of the work is, well, the text is actually handwritten, which varies in quality. It honestly looks like several different handwritings have had a stroke at several of the different classes and features of the game. And while all of them are readable, not everybody's cup of tea is reading a person's print. It lacks a certain uniformity. Again, it harkens back to the idea that by reading this magazine, you are looking into a gamer's journal of all of his ideas that he had for the game, and inviting you to take them into your own game or judge them as you will. What I will say is that I actually found that to be, I can't describe it any other way really than charming. It speaks to a certain vulnerability in the process. It opens up the writer and shows his stroke as he creates, not hiding behind a word processor of any sort. As I said, mercifully enough, the handwriting is, for the most part, perfectly legible, although there are some areas where it is a little rough. There's certainly nothing that is occluded or that one cannot understand just because the print. So, as far as having fully included various pieces of art, again, mostly drawn by Mr. West, and also that the writing and everything is laid out for the most part functionally. I'm going to give this a passing grade, with the caveat that some of it may not be to your taste, especially if you like your works looking as professional as possible. So as long as you understand that that is not the focus of this work, it is, again, more like a living journal, you can get by that and certainly use the work. The art and what is in it does not take away from the overall effect of the piece at all. Now, as far as writing goes, I must admit, when I first saw this, I felt that this was going to be an issue. I'm happy to say that the piece in general is edited fairly well. Of course, there are abbreviations for game systems. There's a great deal of understanding that the person who is using and consuming this work is going to be familiar with old-school rule-style games. The concepts are fairly universal for these various games, and this work relies heavily on that universality. It does give notes that particular rules may fit a certain subset of the old-school rules better, but I would say that, if anything, it's only relatively minor tweaking that the game cries out for, and the writing does allow you to easily understand the concepts. Now, that being said, this is an unvarnished, not overly politically correct work. This is written for people who are interested in opening the floodgates of what fantasy gaming permits. Some of the classes include chainmail babes, sinewy barbarians, barbara bunnies, cat girls, just to name a few. So, in this, you will end up picking and choosing the things that you find interesting or appeal to your particular game. There's almost no doubt of that. But it has a certain refreshing flavor to it that, again, it's something that you can appreciate, that the person who's created this game kind of has a no-holds-barred approach. And as long as you're not offended by things like that, and realistically, there's no nudity, for instance. There's nothing that's truly offensive, just something that may offend delicate sensibilities who are used to a more sanitized and homogenized product. So, as far as the writing goes, I'm happy to give it a passing grade. Again, I find the writing efficient. I did not notice any glaring editorial flaws, such that I felt the need to pass on or comment to the writer or correct in my own head. I found it to be fairly easy to follow and concise. So, passing grade for the writing, certainly. As far as the mechanics of this piece go, I would definitely tell you that in old school rules, balance wasn't the first thing that was considered. Style meant a great deal more than how well a particular class matched up against another one. After all, when the mages start throwing the fireballs, the warriors start falling behind quickly. And as far as classes like monks and bards and rangers, well, there'd never been a completely perfect balance in old school rules. That's not going to change with these classes. As far as balance goes with the current classes available in the various old school rules products, well, some are going to be vastly more powerful. When I say vastly, I don't mean they will completely take over the party. However, having a class that offers an instant kill option with critical hits, well, you're going to have some rather messy victories at time to time, as the sinewy barbarian allows. You may have entire encounters made a laughing stock when you have a character like the chainmail chick, who can lay down some heavy debuffs on male and sometimes female observers in a contest. But as far as characters like the Black Knight, well, you have to account that sometimes just getting one of the features of your class requires a save or die effect, as your patron slays you for your arrogance of asking for something, there are a interesting spread. It adds color. And it will definitely make for some interesting conversation around the table. The classes themselves, as I said, are not the best balanced. The dungeons themselves are cleverly enough laid out. As far as providing the group a challenge, I find it to be challenging, perhaps not overly deadly, which is good. An intelligent group will probably be able to get through these dungeons with a minimum of headache and heartache. As far as the monsters go, they range from quite powerful to almost silly. However, they do escape some of the inside humor that you can occasionally find on independent pieces. That's a good thing, and it makes for a much more useful monster in your pocket. The weapons that they come up with are rather powerful. Care should be used when using them. The spells are interesting. They add a nice flavor and color to the selections that wizards might already have. Certainly, if you are running off of a fairly vanilla old school rules game, having extra spells, or at least using the guideline that the creators of this work use to create their own spells might be very useful to you. The rules changes allow you to play in the way that I suspect the writer does, which is full throttle, no holds barred, lots of megadeath, and for some games that's perfectly fine. Understand that when you start incorporating principles like exploding dice, however, things can get very messy for both sides of the screen, the players as well as the monsters. After all, those players are going to be facing more blows than the individual monsters, so bear that in mind. As far as the magical house rules, well, house rules for things like critical hits, critical fumbles, and magic have existed since, well, players first started to get their hands on Dungeons & Dragons. Therefore, again, having a nice critical table is interesting. You may like it, you may not. Buyer beware on that. Some of the suggested rules they make for a wand specialist wizard are, well, they may be laughable if you don't run with a great number of wands that you give out to your party, or don't have them easily accessible by sale. There are a couple of things that you may want to consider do make a wizard who uses these rules a bit more powerful. So, one of the other suggestions early on in the Magical House rules suggesting that a wizard may retain a spell by making a saving throw. Well, that kind of kicks old Vancian magic right between the legs a bit, so, well, it's certainly an interesting concept at the very least. I would recommend, if you have any interest in those ideas, try it in a smaller setting before you throw it into your campaign. But if your campaign can handle a bit of bruising, then by all means, let your wizards run amok. And the custom character sheets are very nice and functional. There's one for warrior types and one for wizard types. They both work quite well. So, as far as the mechanics and everything of that goes, I would say that they create a new flavor for your mechanics. It's not so much that they alter the entirety of the game, but what they do is they take the safeties and the handbrakes off to a certain extent. They open the game up for both disaster and for truly epic outcomes for combat and other scenarios in your old school rules game. I give it a passing grade. If you use them, they will change your game. There's no doubt about that. They do what they set out to do. Would I particularly use them in my games? I've actually been entertaining, ever since reading this, the idea of playing a no-holds-barred, wide-open, old-school rules game. they've inspired my imagination, and if that isn't an adequate enough endorsement of what these rules propose to do, well, I can't think of anything. As I said, passing grade. The final part, again, is value. Value can certainly be a sticking point, but I assure you in this one it won't. The model that they've chosen to go with is a pay-what-you-will model. So therefore, you can have the entire work for a penny if you wish. I, personally, enjoy patronizing enterprising creators, and I recommend giving a little bit more to help them pay the bills, and also, as they work for further editions, perhaps with a little extra money in their pockets, they can spring for a few extra features or longer work for the next one. I'm certainly interested to see what the next ideas are, and personally I'm hoping that they touch upon things that have been sadly neglected in a lot of works. For example, they have a selection of magical swords, but swords are everywhere. Let's see some shields, or polearms perhaps, or other types of armor. Their imagination is certainly rich enough that they should be able to come up with some truly interesting and perhaps groundbreaking ideas for their next offering. So, I have to give the value a passing grade. Pay what you will is a very daring strategy. You don't know if people are going to take your work for a pittance, or if they're going to give you what you're due, or perhaps reward you and encourage you by giving more than what a work would normally charge. So, I certainly think that if I was going to find this in a store and print and thumb through it, I would pay $5 for the work. And if my memory serves me, I believe I paid $3 for the work. It's currently hovering at around $2.25 on the average. As I said, if you take this recommendation and you do purchase it, well, you can certainly check it out for very little. If you don't use old school rules, of course, I don't think these characters would be easily adapted in any other system. They're just a little too silly for more of the later versions of Dungeons & Dragons, most other fantasy games, as far as the general tendency towards restraint and balance and issues like that. That being said, a clever enough game master may be able to pluck elements out of this work and might find a use for it themselves. So, win for everyone as far as I'm concerned. I am the OmnusCritic, and I do endorse black pudding. I think that I'm very much interested to see what the second offering has, and I will most likely be reviewing that as well. So, Magic Fireplace and I wish you safe travels.